Hello and welcome to the Smooth Scaling podcast, where we talk with industry experts to uncover how to design, build and run scalable and resilient systems with the ultimate goal of providing a great user experience. I'm your host, Jose Quaresma, and today I'm joined by Tristan Watson, who's a seasoned platform engineer, has worked at Booking.com and Rapha, amongst others, and is now at G Research focusing on the financial sector. We had a great chat today on how to handle peak traffic and the challenges and the trade-offs of scaling infrastructure. I learned a lot. I loved his learnings and the advice that he would give to his younger self, and I hope you do too. Enjoy. Tristan, welcome to the podcast. It's great having you.
Yeah, really happy to be here. I think it's been a long time trying to land this up, but excited to have this conversation.
I would maybe start with maybe a bit of a broader question, but maybe trying to understand a little bit kind of your background and your journey, because you've had quite a diverse career, right, across industries with quite some very interesting companies in the space of kind of scalability and resilience. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. My background's very technical, so I started off, I did the whole university thing and all of the things around that, of course. But yeah, my background is technical, sort of in the new school system administration space, so scaling, DevOps, infrastructure engineering, site reliability engineering, all of that good stuff. And yeah, I've had quite a diverse career working in very different industries. My first job at a startup, one of the things that I came out thinking was, this is great, which was a public cloud company. And it was really wonderful. Like we had running around, doing things, trying to scale public cloud infrastructure on OpenStack. But one of the reasons that I sort of left, and one of the reasons that I felt like it was right to leave, was I had no idea how people in industry were truly using cloud systems at that moment. So it became quite obvious to me that I had a lot to learn. And since then, I've gone on to work as a SRE, across numerous companies from Booking.com to Rapha Cycling. And currently, I am taking a bit of a wild move to contract, but I'm essentially contracting in the finance world, which is very different scale and everything, which is very interesting. But it's been a lot of really good learnings across the board, all around scaling, all around resiliency, and basically trying to keep systems online and serving traffic.
You mentioned Booking.com, you mentioned Rapha, and we're talking a little bit more in this episode on kind of the Rapha use case with product drops, right? But maybe before we go into that, was there a very different way of looking at scalability and resilience between Booking.com and Rapha? How would you kind of compare the perspectives there?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that those two companies are different, and it's mainly just to do with scale and size. Booking.com is a huge international business that's very well known. The side that specifically I was working on was sort of the rental side, the rentalcars.com, which is an arm that rents vehicles to people, and that's part of the Booking Holdings group, and under the Booking umbrella. And yeah, essentially we would be trying to scale to allow people to book cars any time of the day, right? You need a car. You need to be able to drive from the airport. You need to be able to drive, to where you're staying. And that's the challenge that we're essentially trying to solve. And it's kind of a two-way problem, these sort of things, because you've got the customers coming in, and they need to, have the user experience that's great. Can they search for a vehicle in a timely manner? Can they book a vehicle in a timely manner? And how do we delight them? But then you've got all these really complex things behind the scenes that allow you to be able to do that. So what I'm talking about there is the challenges of sort of grouping up aggregated car rental places, right? So the enterprises of this world, the Eurocars of this world, the Hertz of this world, the Sixt of this world. How do you sort of aggregate all of those together in a timely manner? How do you store them? How do you ensure the pricing is where it needs to be? So it's kind of a two-way street in terms of scalability. I think one of the main problems that we had was just being able to, at that point, being able to scale quickly. A lot of that was because of the hardware that we were on. So at that moment, and mainly still, there's a lot of owned data center hardware, so co-location and everything, which was same kind of problems, but like different level. In terms of, there were more modern things in areas compared to the startup, and less modern things to what I'm doing now. But you can't always plug in servers, right?
Yeah.
And if you can, it's going to take you a long time to get it provisioned, most likely, because you have to sort of provision it, you have to install the images, you have to ensure that you have all of the networking done correctly so it can talk to the databases that it needs to talk to. So it's a long game. So you have to do a lot of gymnastics there. And we did a lot of this at Booking to try and do it, because the hardware and the software that you're working with at a company like that is very difficult to change. It's making a lot of money. It's serving a lot of traffic. Do you need to change it? Hopefully at some point, but it's still making money and still got to keep the lights on. So, the challenges there became, how can we get the most out of this? How can we tune this? And what can we do to sort of aggregate the traffic? So that was sort of load balancing, and load balancing, CDNs, all of that good stuff that would allow you to have less on load coming in and having to distribute it around. So that was really kind of challenging in some ways, because it's very slow to work with, and you've got to rely on the things that you've got there. So there's a big piece of resiliency when you're working with your own hardware. But compared to somewhere like Rapha, which is a smaller business, there was a lot more freedom and opportunity in terms of relying on other people to do some of that lifting for you. So the unsung hero was the sort of CDN software that we were using at Rapha, in a lot of ways, which was Cloudflare whilst I was there, which allowed us to basically put a lot of load and trust ultimately that they were going to serve traffic in a timely manner for us, and we really piggybacked on top of that. So to sort of loop back around and wrap all of that up, the challenges were kind of the same, different scale, different technologies, but the customer expectation kind of remains the same. People want to be able to have the user experience to go in without sort of like being delayed and carry out what they're doing in a timely manner. So although one was sort of hardware and serving, hundreds of thousands of requests per second and things like that, and one was not, you still have to have the same expectation for the customer and the same user experience. So that was quite interesting, really, to see the differences between like a really customer focused business in terms of Rapha in the apparel world versus a services company that's just aggregating and selling access to vehicles. But the specifics of like the customer expectation remain the same.
The traffic, I mean, you have big load on booking.com, right? But I guess the difference between the baseline and the peaks is then way different, and that's kind of way different than with Rapha.
I think one of the most interesting things about Rapha, which you sort of take for granted, but when I reflect on it, it's quite interesting, is just how international it was, or it is as a business. So by that, I mean, they have presence in Asia, they have presence in the US, they have presence in Europe, and all of these and Australia and sort of the oceanic countries too. So all of these markets for a company that's not huge are ongoing, and you have to serve them all and delight them all at the same time. And that's a hard challenge as well, because, with something like rentalcars.com or something like that, there are different companies serving different regions, and therefore different, specialisms around how do people rent cars? Do people even rent cars? Is it motorcycles, for example, in different areas? And we didn't really have to deal with all of that, because we're happy with the key markets and making sure that, it was a competitive service in those key markets. Maybe there's not somewhere to rent any cars from, like there's not a provider, so you try to aggregate nothing. And so that's the customer, which would happen, certainly. So in comparison, Rapha's website had to be up all the time, right? It had to be able to serve traffic. We had numerous, at that point, numerous distribution centers being able to post out and everything, all of the stuff in different locations. That's an interesting problem too. But in terms of the peaks and troughs, I would say it was a bit more static almost at booking, because people are always doing something, and you don't have a real clue what that is. But there's definitely really popular spikes around the school holidays in particular. Um, but there's also the other element of the commercial side of that. So like a lot of the company was driven around partnerships. So when you're going to book a flight, for example, you may see a car rental as one example. You're booking a hotel, you may see a car rental. Um, and you can't really know what that looks like because there might be a sale on one of your partners, and then you get a peak there. So there's many peaks, many different things, but the traffic at Rapha and the sort of trends and that we could analyze and look through were very much based on a standard consumerism and consumer trends, so Christmas and all the rest of it. But then you would get trends peaking up just in summer, but also around like major events, right? So you have a lot of racing and road cycling, for example. If some of the big races that the Tour of Flanders is on, and someone wins from one of the teams that sponsored, then yeah, you try and make the
Then you
most
get a
of
peak.
that. It's
Yeah.
very good.
Sure. One thing that I was curious, you mentioned a small company, but then ensure kind of doing business around the world from a kind of a support and SRE perspective. I'm curious how did you make that work? Was it did you have a central team? Did you have a distributed team across the globe supporting? How did that work?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and something that was quite challenging at times. Um, the real answer to that is hard work. And in an ideal world, we would have had teams helping support it, and technical teams, or a technical individual somewhere else that was able to sort of understand this. But I think we did a really good job actually of making the most of a monolithic infrastructure and monolithic service at that point. So, servers with lots of resource serving many requests. Um, but a lot of it was just toil. So, really striving for uptime, which was pretty successful, I'd say. We did have our moments. Of course, we had our moments. I think the lockdown brought some of those moments quite quickly in terms of an increased demand for cycling products, because people had nothing else to spend their money on apart
Yeah.
from bicycles, which led to a bicycle shortage, and also made if you could serve the stock a lot of money for certain companies. But it's still an interesting one where the expectation shifting in industry towards people being able to have teams that are capable of solving incidents, right? And you're seeing many companies now spring up. Rudely as an example, Incident.io as an example, that they're kind of trying to bring that to the business as a tool set that enables transparency and better communication during outages. And we had a few of those conversations with those companies. Instant.io at that moment was in its infancy, incubating at Monzo Bank here in the UK. They've now, they've got offices now in New York and all the rest of it. So that's really gone from strength to strength. But I think fundamentally, the expectation within software teams and the expectation within infrastructure teams to be on call is becoming more and more a given. And that might mean it's part of your contract. That might mean it's kind of it's unpaid at times, or you're getting it back. I'd Rapha with an international team and a small team sort of serving the market internationally, should I say. Um, the the real challenge was, how can we ensure that this is up all the time for all of our key markets, as mentioned before. And the other challenge there that was kind of tricky was, how can we do this in a way that we're not relying on headcount? So how can we use services? How can we use the best in class services to aid us with this? And we're talking there about like CDNs and firewalls, products, and things like that, to ensure that we're not exposed. But yeah, it's an age old problem of trying to like mature an organization that is small and push down the reliability aspects and the need for reliability, um, without sort of burning everybody out in a short period of time. There was some really fun incidents. There were some really like sad incidents. The fun ones are like you're taken offline, or you'll start having scaling problems because you've got too much traffic. That's a good place to be. We had a collaboration of Rapha with an artist in LA in the lockdown, and we just got too much traffic, and that was great, but also terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
It shouldn't happen, but it's a nice place to be when you've got that demand. But then there's other things where you just sort of mess up, and they're the moments that really have to take learnings from. Like people banging on the door and too many people banging on the door is a nice place to be, and you have to be able to deal with that. Yeah, it can happen once, but you have to learn after that. But the things where you as a team mess up, they're bits that you need to take learnings and put into control. So
I think it's a super interesting area, right? And the team that I lead here at Qt, right? We are across the globe providing 24/7 support and kind of follow the sun approach to it. So I think it works super well, and a super good team. It also comes with its challenges in terms of kind of time zone differences and distance itself, right? So it's a hard one to get right? So it's there's always things to improve on, but it's very, very rewarding, right? When you see things working well across the globe and teams working well together and kind of supporting our customers and supporting the systems that we have up and running. It's very rewarding.
And those moments, I think those moments where you have to bring things together and everyone brings their own different expertise. For me, at least, and maybe this is like forgotten sometimes in the industry, but those moments also, and trying to come up with solutions for things, like for example with Qt, like how do we ensure that we stay up during high demand peaks? Those moments to me are the best in technology. Like that is what gets me, going. That's what gets me riled up. That's what gets me motivated and excited. Those moments where you have to deal with something. And I think like it's difficult. Of course, you have to follow the sun. Sometimes you're up at 4 a.m. doing something. Like you have to be. It's part of the job almost. But those moments are where I've learned the most. Those moments was where I've seen the best in people and really had lasting experiences where you're in the trenches together almost, and you're fixing things, and it's difficult. You're having a bad time. You probably don't want to be up, but you laugh about it later and you talk about it later, and the stakes are high because normally you're just doing a job. You're completing different tasks, improving things, hopefully monitoring things, improving the views. But at least in the sort of SRE side of things, it's all in preparation sometimes for something going wrong, and you try and prepare the best, but you're always going to miss something. So I think from my experience over the many, many years, those are the moments that I think almost fondly of. And I don't get me wrong.
I think I get what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. In the moment, it's awful, but afterwards, you sort of you look back fondly, and you can learn from really good people. I've got a friend recently who's he mentioned to me once, I love an incident. I love being okay, let's get in. Let's, be the incident commander, communicate things out, come up with a solution, action the solution. And I think he's right. I really like those things, and I really like those moments. And I think there's an element now where we're expecting that not to happen because, and this is the downside of using services where companies will promise to solve things, but generally technology is a lossy system. We should expect things to go wrong. And that might be like Cloudflare's BGP routes break tomorrow and you can't get to your services. But those things are really interesting. They're not easy, but I think there's a lot of value in that, and I hope that juniors have the opportunity to just sort of get flung on a rotor and praying that things go wrong, because that's to me how you learn across the board.
I fully get what you mean. It's when the pressure is on that hopefully we also learn the best, and as you said, see the best in people. So that's I see that. Maybe double clicking on Rapha, right? Because you talked a little bit about some of the tech stack, and maybe we can go a little bit more into it. You mentioned Cloudflare as the CDN. It would be interesting to talk a little bit more about the rest of the stack there, and then maybe some background and how do you got to the kind of the limited edition collabs and product drops, and maybe give a little bit of context there before we go into how do you kind of, what was your thought process and work towards being able to handle those peaks.
Yeah, sure. I'll just delve in very quickly at a high level for the infrastructure at that moment. So it was very few servers, big servers, lots of resource in a co-location, being able to serve all of the traffic, as was mentioned, to an international audience. Um, but it was slow, it was archaic, it was difficult to ensure that you were going to stay up when you did upgrades. And there was a lot of manual processes around. There was a lot of like typing commands, and then I have no idea. Like you get a playbook from someone that worked there a long time ago, that's written it once because they knew how it worked. It's no longer there, and you're like, okay, this is the infrastructure. So, yeah, the CDN in front did a lot for us, and I think it's a good product fundamentally. Um, uh, but it was pretty behind the scenes. It was yeah, it was interesting. And coming in from somewhere like Booking as well, where you've probably got redundancy like 10 times, to see international business being served by very few servers, kind of it worked. It was definitely interesting. It was definitely a wake up call. There was a moment in my first few weeks at Rapha where um, I sort of said, how many servers have we got? And I've come from like 2,000 servers, right? So a lot of servers, like hypervisors behind there, kind of a standard virtual machine environment with thousands of servers, and then some physicals that would be able to get the raw performance of bare metal hardware. Um, and it was like, oh, we've got like, I don't know, like less than 100. And me having that moment where I was like, wow, that's not very many. And I expected more. And you realize that the company's mature, but it's not a tech company. And that was really interesting for me. So what is the focus of someone like Rapha? Well, it's to delight the customer. It's a loyalty brand. How do you sell the best garments possible for cycling? That's the company mission. Um, and yeah, so the infrastructure was rough and ready, and we had to rely on, as mentioned, the services around it to ensure that we were able to be up. And that cost money. That cost more than servers, probably. It was easy to manage. We could do things with the click of a button. Um, but it doesn't scale very well. And there's one thing in serving, from a consumerist perspective, serving traffic in a timely manner and being able to like bundle things up and send them to the customer as close as possible via a CDN. There's another thing in being able to deal with things around sending, events back. So if someone's bought something, have they paid? Send that message back to continue the process. And those things wouldn't work very well. So I mentioned the sort of the collab as well with uh, with the artist before, and that was becoming a bigger thing, right? Everyone knows those like businesses that are sort of hype based, Supreme, Obey, all these super cool companies. There's one in London called Palace, which is like very very popular and hype beast kind of mode of things. Um, and yeah, we started doing different drops of different products, working with different teams. So at that moment, Rafa had a amazing state of the art custom platform. So you could use it to design your own kit. You could use it to different patterns, different logos, whatever you wanted. And then it would get manufactured and so on. Now it's all bespoke again, which I think makes sense. But it meant that you were able to work and start doing these collaborations with people, where companies would come in or individuals would come in and say, I want to work with Rapha, or people in Rapha would go and say, oh, we really like your work. Would you be interested in doing a collection for us? And they'd spend some time doing some patterns, and then we'd make that. So it's kind of two really interesting elements there. But that sets the landscape and sets the stone almost for a bigger company. You can do this. You've proven you can do this at a small scale. What about a bigger drop with a bigger name? Uh, and that moment came to me sort of 3 weeks. We did it first for the Giro d'Italia and during lockdown, which was moved slightly out. And I think we had kind of like, we'd done these things, and we'd had success. We'd learned from them. We'd been able to scale to the best of our ability and put limits in place so that the website didn't go down for various drops. But then it was the conversation of, okay, we've got something that's bigger than we've ever done before. Is the infrastructure capable of staying up? And you look around, you look at the metrics, you try and delve back in time and look at the load on the systems from a database perspective. You look at the load in the system from front end all the way through the stack. And you look at it and you think, captive audience, lockdown, we're in danger here. We needed to look for other solutions to be able to scale it. And the worst thing you can do in those moments is go down. You've got a captive audience that are maybe sat there at work on their phone sneakily under the desk trying to buy some super cool product. You have to stay up. You have to delight the customer. And that's when we had to start looking for alternatives.
Do I hear it right that you didn't actually get to experience the bottlenecks because you actually kind of you did the homework? So you mentioned that you I think you mentioned database and front end. So I guess you're saying that somewhere in there you would get the bottlenecks, but you actually didn't get to experience them because you planned ahead and did your homework there. Is that?
For the most part, we had one. We had one, we had one outage where I hadn't been there so long and things just started falling over. And it's hard to see how much traffic you've got in sometimes. When you've got that's the one problem with these sort of systems where you're trying to link together things. It becomes really difficult because you're getting metrics then at each level, but you're not sure entirely which one is correct. And there's some discrepancies often between the two. So you have to spend a lot of time stitching those things together. And that's our luxury we didn't have at that moment. So we didn't have the observability that we needed to be able to make those decisions. But yeah, everyone loves the word iterate, right? Iterating in that sense becomes, how do we stay up because we didn't last time? So they're the iterations, and we did a lot of learnings there. There were some times where the website was down, most definitely, and I think the team did a really good job of bringing everything back up. But we had to learn from those moments to know where the bottlenecks truly were.
And then once you start, then kind of once you got to the conclusion, okay, we need to do something so that we can handle the really big drops. Kind of what were the alternatives that you looked at? Can you share a bit?
We were kind of fortunate that we'd done a big migration away from a co-location offering where we had servers and hypervisors, and that was what was serving the traffic into AWS. So we could scale. We had the ability to scale. But those things are only as good as your weakest link. And the weakest link in that case was definitely the database. And this just happens a lot where, unfortunately, it was a particular type of database that is expensive to scale to because of licensing and things like that. So that becomes a bit of a trade-off. Do you want to scale this and spend X amount of money and then have to scale it back down? What happens when you scale back down? Is that safe? Do you want to scale it back down? And we looked at just building out more servers. So we did look at trying to improve the auto scaling group and AWS. So you have the ability to look at those things and really improve that. But fundamentally, it becomes a moment where you've not that much confidence, and we didn't have that much time. So you're panicking a little bit. You're thinking, oh, this could be one of the biggest trading days of the business, and I'm not sure that the systems that we're relying on here are going to be up to the task. So then you start doing like, and this is where it gets fun, where you like, the only way that you can think to do that is do some load testing quickly. So these parameters is not something that, if we had all the time in the world, I would have loved to have done load testing like every month or something. Would have loved to have done that. We didn't have that much time. So you're doing load testing, but you don't know where the high mark and the low mark is. So you're like hammering these, and you're like, okay, that's pretty bad. Let's tune it down a bit. They're trying to find this middle ground. So you need something in those moments that you can parachute in, and you have confidence in, and the business has confidence in, because everyone's looking around in like the go no go meeting, thinking, okay, we've done our bit. The product's ready. Can we sell it? Is the platform that we're trying to sell it on ready, available, operational? So yeah, it was an interesting one to have those sort of crunch conversations. And as mentioned, it was kind of like 2 weeks before, where I would have like, yeah, in an ideal world, months before, but you just have an opportunity. You have to act. It's business. You have to react to those things. An opportunity presents itself. Can we do it? Yes. So it became quite apparent that we needed all the help we could get.
And then in the end, you found that help with the virtual waiting room, right?
Yeah, I think we were really lucky in some ways, because it's a product that I knew kind of existed, but I didn't know the use case of it. And what I mean by lucky is this was during the COVID pandemic. So I'd experienced it trying to buy some groceries. You're trying to go onto like a supermarket website, and it's like, you're in a queue, come back in an hour. And you're like,
Yeah.
what is this? Like, I just want to buy some, and some of the shortages, toilet roll, soap,
Mm.
all the good stuff.
Yeah.
You can't go out to your house potentially, or you're trying to buy it for somebody else. There's a lot of that going on too, because like, you've got family members that don't really know how to order food online, and you're having to do it for them. You spend a lot of time in those queues. Um, and that's the moment where I think it became normalized almost, where it was like, okay, well, this software exists. Those pieces of software I probably used a few like tickets, but you have it reinforced at that moment because of the pandemic, and the changes around that, and seeing it around. So it's kind of, I knew instantly, okay, this is the solution that's going to be able to, a big lever, or a big parachute we can call and then say, hey, please, come to our aid. So it was kind of figuring out what that was, and lots of frantic Google searches. Hey, which one's the sort of industry leader? What's the best one around, that we can get a meeting with to have these conversations quickly? And yeah, we essentially just looked around and used the wonderful world of Google searching to figure out what the market leaders are, and then we started sending messages to different people. But I think at that moment, without the pandemic, it would have been, a more arduous process and less certainty, because you would have been trying to figure out the solution. You've maybe seen this at one place. How easy is it to bring in? Well, if, a supermarket in the UK can parachute this in, then we probably can too. So it gives you a lead ultimately that you can start trying to figure out those things.
Good. And how was you said it was just a couple, you didn't have a lot of time. So I think I heard you say a couple of weeks. So how was then the process of kind of, I guess, setting it up, and then your experience and your team's experience during the drop?
It was super interesting. There's a lot, like, yeah, we ended up doing 2 launches, and this was the first one. And we used waiting room software. We used Kirill actually for both of them. Um, but there was a lot of uncertainty, if I'm honest, because it's not something you own, right? And it's going to be hard if we go down because like we've got the numbers wrong, or the software just doesn't work as expected. Um, it kind of goes a bit weird. So you're putting a lot of faith in it, and let's just say like 2 weeks. It's kind of frantic. It's kind of like, okay, here's the problem. I know what I need to do. How can I do it? Um, the way that worked for us as well, like we had a few options, but it had to be um, the easiest to deploy and the easiest to have confidence in. In that moment, we were on Cloudflare as a CDN, which, saved us a lot of stress. But there was also like a connector, and we've been playing around with serverless and the way that that works with Cloudflare workers and in their infancy. I Thank God there was a Cloudflare connector integration with Kira. So we got access after a call to sort of test it out, and it was a lot of trial and error. And this is what's also interesting about those moments. Um, in technology, you're always trying to replicate the big companies, whether you like it or not. You're always looking up and thinking, "Wow, Google are doing this," and you're always trying to bring something that's into the business that's probably been proven out of scale somewhere else, and the hope that your business gets towards that scale too. It's not always the case, and you're not able to achieve that. So you want to be doing like the idea that you're not committing code to make these changes was kind of a big, ooh, okay, how does this feel? You're very used to making changes in code. You're very used to rolling things out in code, and that is best practice for a reason. But now you've got this piece of software where you're copying and pasting like different code snippets and trying to like figure out how it works. And you're in like a web UI writing code to put in front of your website and handle every single request. Um, and there's an element of wanting to know how it works too. So it's not just, okay, like click, click, I'm happy, done. It's kind of like, how is this doing this? You end up like thinking about the code, thinking about the architecture. But I think without that, it would have been really challenging because we're able to just deploy it. I don't know, Cloudflare at that moment or any CDN, it's your gate, right? We're able to just like put someone, a bouncer on that gate for us and say, okay, you're coming in or you're not, or you've got to just queue for a little bit. And being able to just deploy it rapidly was a real win for us. And it enabled to get the confidence quickly because I didn't want to spend all this time like at the 11th hour trying to deploy something to a web server. I could use cache, maybe try to spin up some sort of queue or but yeah, the confidence was very low in anything like that. So we wanted to get it up as quickly as possible and then start figuring out what the experience would look like to the users. I think we did a good job, but it wasn't on our own.
You did mention one point there on kind of you putting faith in us at that time, right, as a kind of a partner, and that's something that really is. It's something that we really take to heart, and it's super important for us because the customers that work with us are exactly as you're saying, putting faith that we are helping, and are kind of especially in the usually the most difficult but also most exciting of times, right? Like, and I bet that drop was a big moment, right?
Yeah, it was a real moment, and the thing that's really interesting about collabs as well is this one was with Palace. You have a conversation with Palace from their technical side, and you're asking, what should we expect from a request perspective? And they're telling you, and you're thinking, okay. And then they tell you that their whole sort of like offering online and their whole web experience is catered around specifically drops. And you're aware that that's not the case for you. That's not how you're setting up the infrastructure. That's not how you have a normal, cost effective way to do things. So you're panicking a little bit. And I think that's what makes the human connection really important and something that can be forgotten. Um, you're a tech professional and you're asking for someone to give you help. And that's kind of like, oh, there's a little bit there where it's difficult. You kind of, you need the help, and like psychologically, you don't want to look like you're not doing your job, but it's like, well, we can't scale. And then you inevitably get, well, why? And you're like, no, and you can't, right? You have to come up with a different solutions. That's really interesting. But I think you are panicking a little bit as a company. Like there was a lot of uncertainty. Can we stay up? Are we able to do this? Like it was under an embargo. So I was told sort of at the earliest time that they felt that we could do it. I wish I would have appreciated being told a little bit earlier. But that's where like those relationships and those people that like customer success members of staff, members of the team from the partner side really come into it, because you're panicking and you need someone that's calm, collected, has done this before, to be able to be like, yeah, obviously you just do it like this, don't worry about it. And then you're like, okay. And it's that level of care and trust, which also is worth everything really in those moments, because you've got a partner that's confident and they're able to elevate and give you confidence during those moments where you're struggling.
That's a really good story, and thank you for sharing it. It was a pleasure for us. It predates me at Kiwit, but it was a pleasure for us to be part of that journey as well. Was there a kind of one or two main learnings for you from that whole process? Something that you would kind of potentially maybe kind of share with other engineering managers that might be looking at similar challenges?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it a little there, but I think that's the main learning for me. Don't expect you to be like to solve every problem as a technology team. You cannot solve every problem all the time. You need to play to your strengths and understand that business needs to be flexible and there's solutions out there that enable you to be flexible. That's hard to take because you're going to be proud. You're going to be thinking, I've got a great team. We can solve this. And sometimes you can, but sometimes it's just not worth it. What's the point of being able to scale to 100,000 requests per second or minute or either for a small period of time when that's not the normal traffic flow? You can probably spend that time elsewhere doing things. So that's the best learning. The show must go on. Um, and if someone can help you to do that, to orchestrate that show or give you the confidence that you can take back to the business leaders and say, okay, we've solved this. We're comfortable. Here's how that journey works. That's the best learning that came out of it. Because before that, I was kind of like, oh, you need to be able to do it like this. You need to be able to write it in code and all the rest of it. How do you put infrastructure as code? And this is the first time that I've kind of just like had a solution that can plug and play in the moment. And that was wonderful because it worked. And it made me realize that, yeah, the business is more important sometimes. And sometimes you just have to make those calls. And that happened for, and you see it now, like I mentioned the supermarket before. You see that people have made that decision elsewhere as well. And it's a known solution. You've got to think about your core product. And that's the most important thing, the bottom line. Forget the pride, forget the expectation. It's all about confidence and being able to solve the problem.
I know that we're almost running out of time, which I think is in this sense a good thing. It was a really nice chat with you, Tristan. We have a few rapid fire questions just to wrap it up, so you don't have to think too much about it. It would be great to just share what comes to mind. First one is scalability is
hard. That would be my answer. It's not always easy. It's still not easy. You need a lot of expertise. You need to be in the right place. It's hard to get to that right place.
Is there a resource? It could be a book, a podcast, maybe a thought leader that you would recommend to people working in this area?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think like the Bibles are all the Google books. So like the SRE workbook is fantastic to go through as a mental process, but the learnings are interesting, but it's not the it's not the textbook. You have to be able to adapt it. Like everything in there is great, but everything in there is engineers at companies at scale that you may not be. You might want to be at some point, but you may not be there yet. So it's the pragmatism that those books offer you. So I'd say still remaining the SRE book. SRE books from Google, so the SRE, Seeking SRE. So really reliability engineering, the OG is still worth a read, and the workbook as well to give you some practical hands-on examples.
And the last rapid fire question, I think you already answered it a little bit, but which advice would you give to your younger self? There, I think I heard it before, the one of you don't have to solve everything yourself. It's okay to find solutions out there that will give you something out of the box that you need. I take that as a very good kind of point that you made in an answer to this. But is there anything else that you would share either to your younger self or someone kind of starting now in the career in this area?
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice I'd suggest from my learning so far is you can't be a generalist. I think there's a lot of that goes on. It's very difficult to be a good generalist, but it's quite easy to be an amazing specialist. And I think that's that ingrained depth of knowledge that you get from these weird incidents and understanding how things work because something's gone wrong. That's what you should be expecting yourself to do. Don't expect to be able to be like, like an amazing database administrator and an amazing site reliability engineer and an amazing software developer. You have to learn about these things. So start very wide, but don't worry about honing in. And I think that's increasingly true with sort of like the world that I see us going into now, where you've got your colleague that's a generative AI model, where that is the expert. You need to know how the systems work and the system thinking behind it. And that's where I'd say people should be spending their time. But you're only going to get there by specializing early on, trying to become general, and then figuring out again with all of that systems thinking how we can specialize it into something that you actually enjoy. So I think that's the one thing. And I think the other thing maybe is just be kind. You're not you've got to sponge things up over time. Can't figure out everything, all the hours in the day, all the late nights. And also be on the on-call rota. You're going to learn a lot. It's gonna suck, but you're going to learn a lot, and you'll be amazed at just how comfortable you are at getting woken up at 3:00 in the morning to fix something, and the satisfaction you get from fixing.
That was a beautiful way to wrap up. Thank you so much, Tristan, for your time.
No, it's been wonderful. Thanks for the conversation. It's been really rewarding to me.
And that's it for this episode of the Smooth Scaling Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing and perhaps share it with a friend or colleague. If you want to share any thoughts or comments with us, send them to smoothscaling@kiwit.com. This podcast is researched by Joseph Thwaites, produced by Perseo Mandilo, and brought to you by Kiwit, your virtual waiting room partner. I'm your host, Jose Quaresma. Until next time, keep it smooth, keep it scalable.